All right, Witcher friends, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Tom or Robots, and I am here with my friend Toasty. Toasty, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right.
Doing all right. Toasty, as you can tell, Toasty's voice is very excited today. You can tell when Toasty's excited because his voice goes up about, I don't know, a 16th of an octave, maybe about right. Maybe a 32nd of an octave. It varies a lot. There's a lot of fluctuation in there because we have that other voice that you heard, Cody Pondsmith. Cody, what's up? How you doing?
Hey, everybody. I'm back. Back and excited to talk about Witcher. Well, actually, I'm not back now, technically.
One of my shows. Yeah. So some of our listeners also listen to the Cyberpunk Lorecast. That's what you're referring to. So Cody Pondsmith. So let me give you the proper.
I'm here to plug your other podcast.
Yeah, you're plugging the other. Let me give you the proper intro, Cody. So we have with us today the general manager of one of the most influential tabletop role-playing companies in the country, or might I say the world, a company that has invented and also designs games for popular series like Cyberpunk and The Witcher. Cody Pondsmith. Cody, welcome to the show. How was that? Was that a better intro?
Thank you for having me, Robots. I'm glad I could set aside time in my extremely busy schedule to deign to give you my presence. And I will be excited to just answer any questions you have with my vast wealth of knowledge.
Awesome. Yeah. So to fill in the gaps here, you graced us with your presence on the Cyberpunk Lorecast about 6 months ago, and we talked. In fact, this was a little bit more than 6 months ago. We talked before 2077 launched, and we talked some lore and some stuff about Cyberpunk. And then, of course, you guys also do Witcher tabletop stuff, which is super, super freaking cool. So we started the Witcher Lorecast, what was that, about 2 months ago at this point? And lo and behold, you're like, hey, I'd be happy to come talk about that stuff too. And I was talking with Jay Gray, who has joined us on this Cyberpunk Lorecast, who works with you as well. And he was like, he just kind of out of the blue, he's like, hey, did you know that there's an entire school of Witchers that was invented and the lore was created as part of a tabletop, as part of like the tabletop side of like the world of The Witcher? And I was like, no, I did not realize this. Like so much of the video games and so much of the world and the lore actually comes from the books. I didn't realize that there was an entire school of Witchers that was tied to the tabletop side of this. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I should actually jump in and clarify a little bit. Okay. We did not create the School of the Griffin. The School of the Griffin is established in the books way back to, I think that it's mentioned in Blood of Elves, which is, I think, the second book to chronologically come out.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I misspoke. You're right.
No, you're fine. What we did was when we sat down, we were going to put out a bestiary for the Witcher TRPG. We wanted to have it, because monsters, Witchers, monsters. We wanted to tie it to Witchers in some way. And at that point, this was before the Way of the Witcher expansion for Gwent had come out, and a number of other things. So there was very little information about sort of any of the other schools other than the Wolf. Yeah. We had previously in the core book, we had talked a tiny bit. I think we devoted 300 words to each of the schools. And filled in a few little blanks there, like the names of what their keeps were and whatnot. And gave a little bit of input on sort of what they were like vaguely. Mm-hmm. But we decided, okay, so we want to basically tie this to Witchers. So what better way than to kind of get this double whammy of talking about the old days, what we refer to as the golden age of Witchers, when there were Witchers and there were more monsters. And then we could talk about, monsters from bestiary. And also we could talk about one of the schools. So we took the Griffin school, who had really, we had a few facts about them as they had been established, by the time of the books. They're mentioned in passing, I believe, by Vesemir, one of the elder Witchers of the Wolf, who basically says, we haven't heard anything out of them for years. As far as we know, they're gone pretty much. So I sat down and basically, we looked at how to build that up and build out using the key character who is the founder of that school, Erland of Larvik. one of, not the first, but one of the first Witchers successfully created by the experiment of Alzur and Cosimo, who had this very unique experience of having been born before the time of Witchers, kind of having an understanding, having been old enough when he was taken to become a Witcher, having an understanding of what the world was like before Witchers happened, and then going through sort of the whole process, which we described a little bit in sort of the introduction of the book, of what the Witcher, we kind of go into more depth on what the process of creating Witchers actually was like, a little bit of sort of the trial and error that they go through in the process of figuring out how to make Witchers, and then the end result when Erland and I think we say like 13 other Witchers are the first batch of successful Witchers actually go out into the world and actually ply their trade for the first time. And yeah, so we basically built all of this up around Erland as sort of this central character, founder of the Griffin School, one of the first Witchers, to kind of have an excuse to talk about Witchers and really sort of expand on all the stuff that we previously knew. And I could talk about that for literally hours, but I'm just going to monologue. So.
That's awesome, because we are at the point in the show where we started with the conjunction of the spheres.
Yeah.
Words fall out of my brain, especially as it gets late at night, which is a perfect time to be doing podcasts in the evening, which is what I do. And then we went into the history before the Witchers, and then we went into the creation of the Witchers, and now we've been delving into the different schools. So we've covered a lot of the stuff you just talked about are some of the things that we've been covering in the most recent episodes.
Oh,
so
excellent.
This topic is actually super timely for what we're going into, because we just talked about the School of the Wolf. And so to now be talking about the School of the Griffin and Erland and the creation of that is like you couldn't have come in at a more perfect time in the series of the show. So that's really cool.
Does that mean that Jay Gray listens to the podcast? I'm pretty sure it does.
Maybe he does. I have a feeling he listens to a few of our shows. Hey, Jay. Hi, Jay. How's it going?
Hi, Jay. Get back to work.
Get back to work. That's your boss talking. Toasty, do you have any thoughts or questions about this? I know Toasty's, I can see his little spider sense tingling over his head. Is that's what, I mean, in the comics, it's like little lines that go over your head, right? Like
this is the Witcher lorecast, so it's our Witcher senses.
Witcher senses tingling.
No, I was just kind of listening. I was like enraptured.
I was so enraptured
by the timeliness of the topic that I was like, wow, this is like perfect. Holy cow.
Right.
If you want, I can kind of go into the background of sort of the Griffin and Erland and all that jazz, as it were.
Yeah, I would love to hear. I would love to hear the background, and I would love to hear some of the key distinct differences between the Griffin School and the School of the Wolf, because the School of the Wolf is kind of the starting place for pretty much everybody. That's the school that we are the most familiar with. So the difference is going to be really, the most interesting thing, I think, for a lot of our listeners.
So the super interesting thing about the Griffin versus the Wolf is, I don't know how much you previously have talked about the fracturing of the original Witcher order, but
a little bit.
The wolves are the Witchers that are left effectively at the end of the fracturing. We originally have the Order of Witchers, and it's all of these disparate Witchers doing the same job, and they're all sort of part of a brotherhood, as it were, but some of them more tied to it than others, and eventually the fracturing happens, and it kind of breaks apart, and everybody goes off to their separate corners, as it were. And the wolves are the ones who are left. They're the ones who didn't leave Castle Morgrave when everyone else left. And at a certain point, they are in Morgrave and they just figure they should move on. The time has come for them to move on. So they basically, migrate east and eventually find Kaer Morhen in something we're kind of hoping to maybe talk a little bit about in one of our upcoming books, where we'll have some more information on all of the Witcher keeps. But the Griffin is, to some extent, like the Griffin is a distillation of Erland of Larvik as a person. Erland is basically this, bastard son of a Skellige raider who grew up on a ship, kind of little more than a slave. His mother didn't want him. None of the crew really cared much about him. He was basically like the night watch on the ship, deckhand. He talks about the fact that, his job was to ring a bell if, the tentacle of a kraken or a group of sirens or something started coming toward the ship, and that nobody on the ship would really care if they came out one day and he just wasn't on deck anymore.
Great.
And
wonderful.
He grows up just a deeply angry child. Like one of the last things that happens before he is sold by his mother to Alger, the mage who would eventually make him a Witcher, is he gets in he basically gets in a fight with another boy on the boat, just like with a hatchet. Like Will absolutely would have murdered this child over a fairly minor slight. So his mother is eager to get rid of him. She never wanted him in the first place, and she sells him to Cosimo or to Alger, and he is taken to at first Riesberg and then later Morgreg, where he goes through just hell. We established that, the early Witcher trials are absolutely terrible. Nothing is working. They are working on sort of these mutagens and processes that they are still formulating. So at a certain point, they're going through this training, which is already horrendously difficult. It is brutally, physically punishing. It is mentally, emotionally punishing. It is just terrible. It is like putting, small children through special forces training.
Yeah, and it's killing them. Children are dying as they're going through this. And
they eventually get to the mutations because everybody's ready, whatever. And they start giving them the mushroom elixirs and teas that we know of from Blood of Elves that kind of work them up to it. And this is where we have the die-off of all of the female acolytes because they didn't quite plan properly. And I have my own sort of headcanon for why that happens, which is primarily that the plan to make Witchers was to make Witchers by making magic knights. The plan was to give knights magic and, super speed and stuff like that. So, I've always figured that the reason this happens is because they started all the experimentation with already existing knights. So primarily a bunch of men who were enlisted in the military or were nobles in various, kingdoms or whatnot. So everything was already tailored for male physiology by the time they got to this point. So it just didn't turn out that well. But Erland goes through this, and there's a long period where a bunch of the acolytes are just dying, just like they're not taking to these mushroom teas, they're not taking to these early mutations, and they're just dying. And every couple nights, the mages will take one of the children and take them to a lab, and the other acolytes will just hear screaming for hours and then nothing. And the next morning, they have this horribly mangled, mutated body that they have to bury effectively. I mean, they choose to bury technically. So this is what Erland grows up in. And by the time he's officially mutated, he has lost one of the few acolytes he kind of had made a friendship with, who's actually possibly a romantic interest for him as a very young child. And he's been mutated into, this sort of monster that none of the mages are particularly impressed by.
Right.
The thing about witches is that by the time they get there, they're called witchers because they're only capable of witchery. To all intents and purposes, as far as the kings that funded this and a bunch of the mages are considered, they failed.
Yeah.
They failed to get what they wanted.
Yeah, I always made the comparison for D&D terms is that they were trying to make paladins and they ended up making rangers.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So basically they moved to Riesberg when they moved to Morgreg, this abandoned castle in the Kestrel Mountains, when the kings who were funding it all pull out, and the mages who were kind of there to try and, get the glory and make magic knights all pull out because they failed. So it's left to basically Alger, Cosimo, and a bunch of sort of renegades to basically carry this on because they actually think they can do it effectively or that this will work. So they bring in teachers from all around the continent, expert alchemists and rangers and knights and things like that. And among them is this knight, Taliesin, who has a long title because he's Nilfgaardian originally. This knight errant who they bring north to basically teach these prospect witchers swordsmanship. And he's kind of known by the students by the fact that his helm, not his helm, but his coat of arms on his shield is a black griffin. Originally Gryphon Griffin, not Griffin. So the quadruped with two wings, the standard depiction of a griffin. Mm-hmm. And Erland latches onto his teachings because Taliesin, being a knight, basically teaches him that he's gone through all of this tremendous suffering, but that if he doesn't throw himself wholeheartedly into this sort of almost ordained task that he has been given to, free the continent of the tyranny of these monsters and protect people from the shadows that lurk in the darkness, then all of his suffering has been in vain. All of this has happened for nothing. So Erland grows up with this understanding that being a witcher is not a curse. It is not something to be necessarily ashamed of. It is almost like a terrible burden that you take upon yourself so that you can help other people. Mm-hmm. You go through all of this suffering so that at the end of the day, you and your brothers can, do what regular knights cannot do and defend the world from these monsters that up until the creation of witchers, the understanding is basically everybody lives in a walled city. And if a monster shows up, you have a mage who will theoretically kill the monster or drive it away. Or if you don't have a mage, then everybody gets together and does what they can. But,
right.
If you consider the fact that, most specters can't be harmed by weapons unless they are in the effect of a magical circle. If a noon wraith is taking over a small village, there's nothing they can do.
Right.
So Erland takes on this basically he deals with this trauma he has experienced by telling himself that this is suffering he had to go through so that he could help people. So
that's an interesting shift. I mean, it's a logical shift, but it's an interesting shift for somebody who has such a dark, rough upbringing to then decide that all of the pain and suffering I went through was actually worth it because it actually helps others, when I have suffered so much and I'm still not, I will never recoup anything for my pain and suffering, right? I will always be at a deficit.
A lot of that is chalked up to Jagoda, the girl that he winds up friends with and sort of romantically interested in during the trials, who it kind of helps him get over his initial, being raised in Skellige as a bastard child, issues. Mm-hmm. And who he has a rather grueling period of trying to keep from dying before she eventually succumbs. So the long and the short is that when the order goes out and they start hunting monsters, that is Erland's approach. I'm going out, I'm going to go out, I am going to, rid the world of these monsters. He really isn't even that much interested in pay. He gets paid so that he can maintain his gear and, pay for doctors and things like that. But he is full-throatedly into the cause of witchers, effectively. And he comes to love this sort of brotherhood that he feels with the other witchers in the school.
Wow, so that's interesting. He really comes to find a real purpose in this. Yeah. And I think that's it's almost a redemption story without the need of it's a faith, but it's a faith in the good of just the goodness of doing good.
Yeah.
Without the need of a deity or something beyond yourself.
Yeah. But so he takes this on, and of course, it's really sad. One of the things I really determined when we were writing Erland was that I needed to make sure that I remembered what world I was writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I am writing Witcher. No good deed goes unpunished in the world of The Witcher.
Right.
So Erland's whole arc basically hits this point as they are the Order of the Witcher. They are established. They are going around killing monsters. And, the fracturing happens. Basically, eventually, Witchers are fighting over contracts more. And this, is a problem they're trying to address, but not really super well. And eventually Arnagad attempts to kill Rhys and has this big coup moment where he tries to take over Morgreg. They manage to fight him off. Erland battles him one-on-one, kind of for the first time put into this situation where he has had to fight someone he considers his brother, which will lead to just really bad blood between them for much of the rest of their lives. And, Arnagad goes off and starts the bear. He is unsuccessfully almost killed by Ivar Evil Eye, who starts the viper. The cats leave because they think they found a way to improve the mutations, and that whole thing happens. And by this point, this order has been Erland's family. And he believes so much in this brotherhood, and everything is just falling apart. So he, sometime after the cats leave, he basically just, takes his closest companions, and just says, we're leaving. Yeah. We're gonna go find somewhere else, and we're going to get the order back to what it used to be. So he and these other Witchers leave Morgreg. They head northwest. They eventually find Caer-Seren, which is an old fortress in the mountains of Kovir and Povis, which had been used previously as another sort of attempt to create Witchers, and was absolutely full of specters and horribly cursed because of it.
Wonderful. Perfect.
Erland and his, I hate to call them acolytes because to him they are brothers, basically go through and clear out Caer-Seren over a long period of time, just killing every specter in the fortress, and eventually sort of cleansing it and making it into their home. And from there, Erland goes on to basically try his damnedest to rebuild what he had when the first Order of Witchers was created. He basically creates this school where, the training is still horrendous. The mutations are still horrifying, but you are still treated with like a baseline level of respect as you are going through this training. It is always stressed in the School of the Griffin that you are part of the family. You will be a brother of the other Griffins. You must go through this suffering, and as his Gwent line says, our suffering binds us. Basically, once you have gone through this suffering, you will be our brother fully, and we will, hunt monsters and help the world. And every winter we come together under tapestries of our great deeds and tell stories around, warmly lit hearths of the monster hunting we have done and the people we have helped. He tries to create this school with this very almost Arthurian kind of vibe to it.
Right. And in the end, it's the friends we made along the way.
Yeah. And he goes through this, and, this goes okay. And in fact, the Griffin is generally considered to be the most respected of the Witcher schools by like the world at large. Because Erland stresses, people don't treat you well, but at the end of the day, he kind of takes this mentality of, a toddler may not always understand why you have to, give it certain rules. The people may not understand why you have to do what you do. They may not love you for being a mutant, but you need to understand that this is something you have undertaken to help them. And they may never understand that, but not everybody is going to effectively.
Right. It's about the closest you get to like a monastic order of witchers.
Yeah.
You have a group that is a brotherhood. They they can't have kids because they physically can't, right? They have a kind of a spiritual goal, and that's to cleanse the world of these evil monsters, to help other people, and to do it for that reason, not for personal gain, not for wealth. The only thing that they get out of it is the brotherhood that they find with these other witchers, right? It's this kind of, they have, it's a very pure kind of sense in all of that. And in going through everything they have to go through, they go through a lot of suffering and a lot of pain that conditions them for this life. So in a way, it's like a monastic, like a monkhood sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as with all things, as with all good things, the arc of the Griffin is kind of this very unfortunate one, because they build this school. There's a big focus on magic because Erland personally is quite trained in using his signs. There is a focus on the wearing of knightly armor and the use of crossbows, especially in dealing with, flying targets and things like that.
Yeah.
A process of sort of a final test for young acolytes where this was one that CDPR threw in that I personally loved, where you had to either, I believe it was, you had to either recite the chivalric code from memory. No, it wasn't the chivalric code. You had to recite.
It was the Liber Tenebrarum.
Yes. The Liber Tenebrarum, which was Keldar's sort of, what was it called? Like specification for achieving full witcherhood, as it were. Or you had to go out and, was it like steal the egg of an archgriffin?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which of course more people chose.
No one ever chose the recitation, according to the lore.
So
that's great.
They do this, and over time, there's just these sort of cracks that form. So Erland basically, when he first arrives in Kovir and Povis, he basically meets with the current ruler of that region and basically says, "We're here. We're going to hunt monsters. We will help your people," as it were. And he is approached about basically, the current ruler of the region basically goes, "I now have a bunch of functionally super soldiers living in a castle in my lands." So, understandable for what we know of the Northern Realms. He basically says, "How about you and all of your brothers just work for me?" Effectively.
Right.
And Erland declines because Erland has always maintained that if a witcher gives up their neutrality, they cannot stand on that neutrality ever again.
Yeah.
If you fight for someone, then you will theoretically fight for anyone. So he says no, and this will go on to hinder him quite a bit in the future. But especially as basically throughout the course of the Griffin, they are doing their thing. Erland spends a large period of time going around and basically visiting the courts of the various kings and monarchs of the Northern Realms, attempting to convince them to effectively sort of state sponsor his school, so that they can receive, payment from the crown, as it were, and they won't have to charge people for their services. Basically, he has this grand, very idealistic goal that eventually, even the poorest beggar will be able to have a witcher lift a curse for them or kill a monster because they won't have to take money from the people they are helping, effectively, which is flatly refused by basically everyone. Because, nobody really, all the kings have the money to pay for witchers. They don't really see what use it is to pay for witchers so that people they don't know and they don't particularly care about can get the services of a witcher. And in Kovir and Povis, they have already refused to sort of sign on with the royalty, as it were. And then later, when Redania attempts to reconquer Kovir and Povis, Erland still refuses because that would still be breaking his neutrality. So this fails. Through the course of it, they wind up we don't talk about this a lot, but they wind up sort of more than anything, sort of tricked into the massive sort of hunting of dragons that happens in the very early days. We learned that basically there used to be a lot more dragons, true dragons.
Yeah.
But at some point they were marked an enemy of mankind, basically like they are the greatest enemy of mankind, which in some respects they can be. True dragons in this setting are extremely powerful, but in the lore, it's also made a big note that a lot of this is pushed by the jewelers guilds of the continent.
Yeah, they're just greedy because dragon hordes. So
Erland and a number of the Griffins are sort of manipulated into killing a number of these dragons, thinking that they're sort of helping people and defeating the greatest enemy of mankind. It's another monster, effectively.
Sure.
When really they are, sort of lining the pockets of this jewelers guild, effectively.
Sons of bitches.
And eventually this all comes down because, Erland has been compiling these, scripts on magic for, by this point, decades, nigh centuries, and has, of course, not given up any of the secrets of mutating people into witchers. Even when he is approached by members of the conclave, who basically, want this information, and Erland says no, because, he remains neutral and these are the secrets of his school. And so a group of mages are sent by the council and create a massive avalanche, which completely buries Kersoren. Erland is out of the castle at this point. So he is he's in that riding back to the castle, and he just sees the avalanche hit the keep. He sees the mages who called it down, but even as his blood boils, as it were, he's not going to fight 3 or 4 effectively massively powerful mages on his own. Right.
They just dropped a mountain on your keep. You're probably not going to take them on your own. Yeah.
And he tries to get back to Kersoren and find out who's alive. We've effectively established that, a great 75 to 80% of the entire school was wiped out in that avalanche. And Erland basically this is basically effectively the breaking point for Erland. He has done all of this for these people for basically his whole life since childhood. And the Witcher's Journal, the book where we talk about this, is basically this whole entry is basically this internal canon of Erland basically shortly after his keep is destroyed, and as far as he knows, all of his brothers are killed, is basically holed up in a cave in the Dragon Mountains, writing down his memories and his stories and all of his knowledge about killing monsters, because he's just leaving. He underestimated the greed of mankind one too many times, and it cost him everything that he loved. So he's just leaving. The monsters by this point are mostly gone. People have started to turn on witchers. So he just writes all this down and basically says, I will leave this here so that when you realize your mistake and the monsters start coming back, you will at least have some knowledge of how to protect yourselves, because I'm not going to be here anymore.
It's like his I told you so journal.
Yeah. And we make a point that there are a lot of accounts of last sightings of Erland of Larvik. No one knows exactly where he went. Some people say that he's, living a hermit's life somewhere in the mountains. Some people said he hopped a ship to Ophir. Nobody really knows where he went, but he just left, which I find personally spiritually crushing, because we later established CDPR later established in Gwent that old Keldar is still there. He survived the assault on Kersoren and still watches the keep, which is heartbreaking for me, because old Keldar would have had to have been one of the witchers that left Morgrave with Erland. And Erland assumes that he's dead, basically.
Right. And so he probably doesn't even know. Yeah.
And Keldar probably assumes that Erland is dead. So I when I started writing Erland, I was like, okay, I'm gonna write. I am unabashedly gonna write a hero. Erland is a hero, but the Witcher world does not treat heroes well.
Right.
His the end of his story is going to be just dramatically tragic, and it kind of has to end that way.
Yeah. Man. Yep. That's yes. Yeah. This is in the vein of oh crap. What's his name? The Tolkien book, the story of what was his name from the Silmarillion? You know what I'm talking about? The story of Christopher Tolkien took the Silmarillion and released it, and then there was more writings about a specific character in it, and just losing his name. But he's one of the most tragic characters that Tolkien ever wrote about, and it's the same kind of story. Where it's, a very tragic hero. But it's very much in that kind of vein. And I really love tragic heroes. So it resonates a lot with me. I think that's really cool. We'll tell you what, I'm sure Toasty has some questions. I've got some questions for you. We need to take a break for the middle of the show real quick, but We'll come back and we'll go over some more stuff. If you've still got some time to hang out. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Absolutely.
All right, here we go.
Very well. Let us get this over with. Something has infested my vineyard.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let me go prepare my something oil then.
All right, everybody. Thank you for hanging out with us, especially those of you who are in the live show with us. Welcome to all of our live viewers. We are currently on twitch.tv/robotsradio and also on the YouTube channel, on the Robots Radio YouTube channel. And we go live on Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. So if you'd like to come join us and hang out with us live, we'd love to have more and more of you guys show up. I'd love to hit like 30 live viewers on an episode so we can see more of your comments during the live show. I love all the live interaction. So thank you for being here with us. Also, for those of you who have taken the time to drop some ratings and reviews and to share the show with your friends, thank you very much for that as well. You guys are amazing. This show is really only able to be done because of you taking the time to listen to it and share it with your friends and take the time to leave a rating and review and all that stuff. And we actually have some new ones that came in just over the last week. We've got these two. We've got one here that says, this is from Jay Gainsey in the United States, who writes, did we go over this one yet?
We've done this one.
We have done this one. I believe
we did.
It sounds
this
familiar.
was the one that called me Toaster.
Yes, this is the one that calls you Toaster. We have done this one. Oh, this one got revised. That's why it shows up on a different date.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Man, sometimes these get tricky. But we do have another one. This one's default with some fancy numbers instead of letters from the United States, who writes, the best podcast around. Wow, the best podcast. That's high praise. 5 stars. This show and the Cyberpunk Lorecast make me excited to commute to and from work. Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, that's high praise.
That's high praise. I started reading the books because of this show. Well, there you go. Well, if you haven't tried out any of the tabletop stuff, then this guy Cody can tell you why that's a good idea. Those are freaking awesome games to play. So you should try those as well. So if you're reading the books and you're playing the video games, tabletop games is where it's at also. Go try those out. So thank you, Default, for taking the time to leave a rating and review. If you would like to get your words on the show, then drop us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. You don't have to listen on Apple Podcasts. You just have to have an Apple account, and you can easily get one of those just on the web browser, and you can leave us a rating or review. So thank you, everybody. We're going to stop yammering about all this stuff, and we're going to get back to talking to Cody. So here we go.
You smell of death and destiny, heroics and heartbreak.
It's onion.
Right, yeah.
We love our little clips from the Witcher show and game.
It makes me laugh every time.
It's onion. Yeah. All right. So here I have an image. I'm going to pull it up on the screen right here. Bwomp. And this is the Witcher's journal. For a Witcher, knowledge is as important as any sword. Can Can you tell us about this image? This is a cool looking picture.
This was a very interesting image to do in the office, because we spent a long time like how this image has to grab like how you interact with monsters in Witcher, and also show Erland and have some interest about it. And there were a lot of iterations of this piece, and we came to this one, and everybody in the office just loved it. And I get so many comments about it being like the cover of a romance novel.
It is kind of romancy. You've got like the handsome dude with like the cool hair. Was that a Griffin tattoo? Or is it just a crow?
It's a raven.
It's a raven. Okay. But you get like the handsome dude kind of looking down, and then you've got like the sexy lady in what looks like either a gown or sheets. But of course, there's more to it than that, because she's got like blood on her face and there's blood on the banister. Like, it's like a romance novel. You know what? This would be a really cool idea for projects, is to find a bunch of like romance novels with like sexy looking people and then like horror them up. Yeah. And turn them all into like Witcher covers.
Oh my gosh.
Well, this is a especially interesting one, because I never actually wrote down the story of what's happening in this scene anywhere. At some point, I guess I'll have to. But the background on this scene is that basically it is very similar to one of the cinematics for Witcher 3. Is basically this situation, somewhat early in Erland's career, after founding the Griffin, where he is basically, Erland still goes out on the path, despite being the grandmaster of the school. And he basically is contracted to take to take out this, at first, monster that is haunting like a local like opera house, effectively.
Also sexy.
And he gets there and finds that it is a Bruja, one of the nastier, higher vampires below like actual higher vampires.
Also sexy.
And he is at this impasse of basically, Erland doesn't particularly like to kill sapient monsters that much.
Okay.
He prefers to try to negotiate with them if possible, if they haven't like racked up a massive death count or kill count of
right. They're not just total psychopaths. Sure.
And this is basically the moment as he is basically going through this opera house, absolutely being led to what is effectively, the most prime spot for this Bruja to kill him effectively. He has tried to sort of, talk this out, as it were, and it's just not working. And this is sort of his moment of, I'm going to have to kill her.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. You're pushing me to the end, and I know I'm in the most dangerous situation I could possibly be in. Fine.
I tried to convince you to leave, but even if you leave, you're just going to kill more people other places. So
right. Yeah, that's how these stories go, though. Like I feel like Geralt goes through a lot of the same kind of stuff in the books and the games and stuff. I also like some of the little details here, like the runes on the silver sword. Yeah, down here, like that. So they're like glowing green. I'm trying to be descriptive for our listeners at home, or at work, wherever you're listening. I'm not going to judge. Also, the stained glass behind the Bruja, the little splotches of blood on the banister, the birds flying around. Either this is a romance novel or this, what this is? This is a Guns N' Roses music video from like 1991. Oh, yeah. That's what this is.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm getting November rain vibes for this thing. Yeah, absolutely. So we have another image here. This one's fun.
Yes.
Yes. This a lot of people are going to recognize this. So this is everybody's favorite bard here.
I should note real quick. My art manager will want me to note this. The first image is by Martina Fakova. an absolutely wonderful artist that we got to do that cover, and also I believe 2 pieces in the actual book that were absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that image is beautiful. I mean, it looks it very much looks like models who were just photographed and then done up artistically. Like, but it's art. This is artwork, right? Like, this is like actual drawn or painted or whatever. Yeah, that's amazing. This is very, very pretty. So this one we have up on the screen right now is everybody's favorite bard, the most famous bard, as my text here from Jay Gray says. Let me read it again because this is too good. So this is the cover image from our upcoming book, A Book of Tales Adventure Compendium. Tales guaranteed to be 100% true, as told by the world's greatest bard. So, so what can you tell us about this?
So this piece done by Bad Moon. They do some of our illustrations. They're another great group we get to work with. What we wanted was our compendium of adventures, 6 adventures that you can run either separate or sort of linked together, is basically literally tales that Dandelion is spinning effectively.
Nice.
And we wanted to follow out, for those of you who, read the books, and even those who don't, Dandelion has this tendency to always, play himself up. And even when he's embellish things, stuff like that. So we wanted to lean into this. Basically, these are 6 absolutely 100% true tales told by the world's most famous, the most revered, the most skillful bard in the world. And just lean into that effectively. We got this great shot of Dandelion standing on the table, about to launch into a ballad. Everybody around, of course, enraptured. We figured this was like
enraptured.
We figured this was like at the tail end, roughly at the tail end of like Witcher 2. Before all the chaos happens in between. You've got Geralt and Zoltan and Triss in the background, just kind of watching. Obviously.
Yeah, Geralt doesn't look that grumpy. Look at him.
He looks like he's got that looks like the most smile you're going to get out of him in this situation.
A patient amusement, shall we say.
Yeah, he's like, all right, this isn't so bad.
And Roach trying to sneak a beer.
Yep.
I just noticed that. Yep. Roach's head is poking through the window trying to sneak a beer.
I noticed. I was
That's
like,
cool.
That horse is trying to sneak a beer.
And some other men and women around the bar just kind of enjoying their beers, listening to him sing. I don't know. It looks like they're enjoying the show. Yeah. Okay. Nice.
We actually, one of my favorite things about this book is that so the book has 6 stories told across the continent. They can all be played separately, or you can kind of link them together. They all have little, like a string that will go through them that can take you from sort of on like a trip across the continent. And at the very back of the book, we have a bunch of like player content. We have information on playing some of the other races that we didn't talk about in the core book, like Vran and Werebubs and gnomes.
Ooh.
We have some, including some new background about them. We have some new weapons and new spells and things like that. And we also have at the very back of the book, Dandelion's actually completely factually accurate stat block.
Okay, so what kind of stuff is in there?
It is a full page stat block that basically is preceded by a note, like a small parchment note, the ostensibly penned by Dandelion, who's been penning notes throughout the book. That says something to the extent of like, I've heard that in other publications they have not completely grasped the acumen of my skill. Allow me to resolve this matter, and then it launches into this stat block where like I gave this to Mr. James Hutt, who ran head on this project, and he basically went through and took like everywhere that we had stats for Geralt. It was like all of Geralt's skill bases, but like +1 or something. So he's like he's just a little bit more skilled at swordplay than Geralt.
Of course.
And he's got a supernaturally high seduction, and the image next to it is the Dandelion Vainglory painting. So it's him standing there with the giant sword, having slain the wyvern.
Very nice. Of course. That's amazing.
Incredible.
Dude, that's awesome. So, okay, so this isn't out yet?
It has just come back from the printers, so we are expecting release in, I think, mid-August, so middle of this month. We're expecting it to hit
very soon.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, this will be fun. I'll have to check this out. I'm
totally buying this.
I love these like wacky, like side kinds of, things. These are awesome. And of course, Dandelion. So, that's great too. That's awesome. Toasty, do you have any questions? We're getting kind of closer to the end of the show. I want to make sure that you can toss some questions in if you have any.
So I did have one question just whenever we were talking about the Griffins.
Uh-huh.
So were the Griffins particularly specialized in fighting flying monsters? As you said that they were tasked or they were manipulated into fighting dragons, which, as we know, those fly too.
And they use crossbows a lot. You mentioned that as well. Yeah.
The Griffins were not so much specialized in fighting flying monsters. It was just more of the way I've kind of seen it is that they had this sort of focus on crossbow from a combination of, you realize at a certain point that when a siren takes to the sky, you can't really use a sword on it. And at a certain point, it's kind of out of range of most of your signs. And then there's also just sort of used to, as we see with a lot of the special crossbow bolts in Witcher 3, there's just used to having that, offhand ranged weapon. In a lot of cases with the dragons, because while they're knights, they're still witchers. A lot of that is, taking these creatures by surprise, largely because, you kind of have to. With a lot of the dragons, we have one story. Well, we don't have a story. We didn't get a whole story for it, but we have a quote from Erland about one of the times he killed a dragon, which was a brown dragon named Fitanahur, which had taken up residence in a pass between Kedwin and Redania in the Kestrel Mountains. And, you don't hit a dragon, straightforward. So he actually basically spent a big bunch of time studying this dragon and eventually found that it had just a pure hatred of necrophages. So he wound up corralling a bunch of necrophages to distract the dragon so that he could basically, get the drop on it, as it were.
Interesting.
It's amazing.
Hey, get a load of all these.
He just gets like a dozen ghouls and he's just like, go get them. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Very smart. Well, nice. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap this up? Anything else cool going on? Anything else you can kind of sneak in there? Well, you're not supposed to tell us, but you want to share anyway.
I've got plenty. Some of which I actually can talk about. So we are Book of Tales is coming to stores near you soon, as it were. We are currently in tail end layout on our next book, Tome of Chaos, which is an in-depth look at magic in the world of The Witcher, nice. Including a bunch of new information about a bunch of the religions of the continent, breakdowns for certain gods, even some of the ones that we don't hear a whole lot about, like the Prophet Lebioda, or the following of the Prophet Lebioda, and Neheleni, and some of the other, not mentioned very often gods. A whole big section on mages and how they get trained, in different places, including a bunch of new information about Gwyson Hall, the Imperial Magic Academy of Nilfgaard, and how that functions. The book is actually sort of tied around the travels of a Nilfgaardian mage who taught at Gwyson Hall, named Glynis var Traharn, who is previously a professor at Gwyson Hall who winds up defecting during the Third Nilfgaardian War. And we get to talk about a lot of how Gwyson Hall functions and how Nilfgaard is sort of dealing with mages and training mages and things like that. We have a whole life path, much like we had the life path for witches in the Witcher TRPG core book. We have a whole life path for mages that goes into how you were trained, where you were trained, and what that means.
That's cool.
A bunch of new magic, new spells, new hexes, new rituals, including some very cool ones like animating armor and some fan favorites that have been described in the books, like Becker's Rock Slide and stuff like that. A whole section on magic items where we talk about, Power Stone Guardians and megascopes and magic mirrors and things like that. Mm-hmm. And a big, horrible chapter on dark magic, where we go into the various practices of necromancy, including a horrible necromantic ritual called Cadfan synthesis, which gets around the fact that you can't really fully. It's hard to fully animate a corpse after it's died by animating a whole bunch of corpses all together in one mass.
Oh dear.
Wonderful. I bet that smells really good.
The art for this thing is absolutely amazing.
Oh God. I just see like a ball of bodies. There's one of these in one or two of the Dark Soul games where there's like the ball of bodies that just like rolls around.
I'm just imagining a centaur from Fallout.
Oh God.
Kind of.
We talk about that. We talk about mutation. We have whole rules for mutating people and even your party members. And a big long chapter on Goetia, where we talk about how you can make deals with devils and why you probably shouldn't, but why you probably will in the end anyway.
Of course, because adventurers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your party's going to do it anyway, because of course they will. Yeah.
And then, this super, I could talk forever, but we have, at the end of the book, we have a bunch of mages, a bunch of key mages that you can meet and interact with. And we have one section, which I particularly enjoyed, which is in the world of The Witcher. I'm going to get my statistics wrong, but it's like 7% of the people who are capable of doing some amount of magic are capable of being sorcerers and sorceresses. And we now have a whole system to talk about that other like 95% of people who can do magic, but can only do like one little thing.
Right.
So you can now build a non-mage character who's capable of like starting fires, but that's like all you can do.
Right. They're like the three of us and how well we can juggle compared to like an actual person who really can juggle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're in the tail end of layout on that. I'm very excited. We're hoping to get that put together by end of the year. And we're already working on the one I'm currently working on, which I can't talk a lot about. Rodolph's Guide to the North. We are putting together a 2-part setup for a big, very RPG focused world guide to the Witcher continent. Rodolph's Guide to the North and Rodolph's Guide to Nilfgaard, which are going to be 2 massive books where we basically go through every country in those regions, give a little bit of history about how the country got founded and what the country has been doing for the past, 1,200 years or so. Actually, it's more like 300 years. And then the whole chapter, those chapters are split up into entries based on different cities and locations within those kingdoms. So you'll have an introduction for like Redania or Temeria or Cidaris or Verdun, which will give you the background. And then there are a bunch of entries ranging from like little half-page entries with just a little sort of snippet of information about a kind of interesting thing to full like 4-page entries that have beautiful big piece of art of the region. And then in the case of cities, we're actually hopefully planning to do full street-by-street city maps of these cities.
Wow.
So we're aiming to basically go through every place in the continent. We only have like 12 or 13 places that have maps, but every place in the continent, basically say like, here's a country. And then here's like 9 or 10 places in that country that you might want to go to or have your players go to. Here's maybe 1 or 2 factions that are very powerful in that region, or maybe started in that region. Here's some information on what it's like to join those factions and work with those factions. And then, because I'm terrible at not putting things in books, there's like a whole small bestiary of monsters that are regional monsters for those areas. I think there's like 9 or 10 monsters that are just like, you'll find this here. Some new items and probably a few new spells. And the super cool thing that we worked on, this was once again Mr. James Hutt's brainchild here, was every page is set up with a sidebar. So every spread has a sidebar on either side, and the sidebar on the left is going to be a basically running account of the narrative of the book, which is Rodolph Cosmer, Dwarven Merchant Extraordinaire, and Brandon of Oxenfurt, greatest scholar in the North, traveling across the northern kingdoms, basically collecting information. So we have these little sort of snippets of their adventure over here. And then on the right side, every right-hand page will have an adventure hook that is tied to one of the locations on that page.
Oh, that's cool.
So the book has, I think the book has something like 100 and something adventure hooks that you can just like pull out and use, depending on where your players are. Yeah,
man, that's really cool. You guys have so many cool ideas.
Sounds
for this
insane.
Stuff. Yeah, that's great.
I have. So Witcher Core was written basically entirely by me and Lisa. Witcher's Journal was written by me and like 2 other writers writing some bits of fiction. And this book, I have 6 writers on staff for this.
Jeez.
And then myself.
Jeez, holy moly. So you're into The Witcher.
Yes.
That's what I've gathered by this whole hour-long conversation so far.
At least a little bit.
That's my one takeaway so far, is that you like this Witcher thing. Got it.
Dude, I guess it's a good thing we invited him onto the Witcher Lorecast.
Yeah. Holy moly.
How serendipitous.
Amazing, man. I'm sure we could talk for hours, like you said. We will have to have you on again. And the more you talk about some of these locations, the more my mind starts going to some of the things that we've seen in some of the teaser trailers for the new season coming up this fall, season 2 of The Witcher. And then I've got questions about that. And I kind of want to pick your brain about that, but then I know we're going to talk for like another hour about that as well. So can we like just tentatively have you back on maybe 6 months from now after that season to kind of talk again about some stuff?
Sounds good to me.
Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, because maybe we can nerd out about season 2 and then some of the cool stuff that's come out over the next 6 months, and do that again. That would be awesome.
Sounds good to me. I'm there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Cody. This has been super, super cool. If only podcasts could go forever, because then we could just keep doing this all day. But then people would be like, holy crap, why do you have a 24-hour long podcast? I have to get some sleep. But we'll talk to you again soon enough. And I hope you have a good rest of your evening. And thank you for taking the time to join us. And is there anything else you want to share? Any way people can get a hold of you? Any websites they should be visiting? Anything they should be doing?
So we're on most social media. I know we have Twitter, we have Facebook. I think I don't know if we're on Instagram. I think we have an account. We just don't post a lot on it. We have our own site, RTalsorianGames.com, and our which is sort of a blog site, and then our store. We mostly post on the blog site, obviously, when we have new updates and the like, but you can find it on most of our social media. That's about it at the moment. I kind of plugged everything on the Witcher front that I was already going to be doing. So as always, it has been a genuine pleasure. I am honored to be on the show, and I'm excited for next time.
Yes. Yeah. I constantly seeing your stuff on Twitter, because that's usually where I'm most active too. So RTalsorian on Twitter. If you guys aren't already following them on Twitter, it's a great place to follow and just stay aware of what's going on.
Our social media manager is absolutely insane. He posts wild stuff on our Twitter all the time.
Yes, and he like actually certifiably insane. No, not actually certified. Jay's gonna be like, what? No, Jay, not certified. That was an easy joke. Calm down. It's okay. Your boss is here. Everything's fine. But yeah, thank you again for joining us. Toasty, thanks for being here too, buddy. We're going to head out. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll be back next week with another regular episode where we'll be diving into another one of the schools. Toasty, do we have a plan? Toasty's
I want to talk about the cat school.
We're talking about cats. We're talking about the cat school of The Witcher.
I mean, this was kind of like our Griffin school.
This is our Griffin. Yeah, this was awesome. You did our job
with
for
the
us.
expert. So. Yeah, there you go. Thanks for taking care of an episode for me. I appreciate it.
All right. The cats are a good one. There's a lot of good material there.
Yeah, so we'll be back next week with talking about the cat school of The Witcher. And we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your night. See you later. Thanks for tuning into the Witcher Lorecast. We'd love to hear about your experiences with the games and the books and the TV series and all your thoughts on everything. Please check out the Robots Radio Discord and follow us on Twitter at Witcher Lorecast.
You've been listening to a Robots Radio podcast. Smart shows for interesting people. Check out all the shows at robotsradio.net.